bytes or thousands of bytes. It had 512 kilobytes of L2 cache and 4 megabytes of L3 cache. Meanwhile, if we take a look at that same MacBook Pro from earlier, you'll see that it has 256 kilobytes of cache, 4 megabytes of L3 cache. It doesn't happen to mention L1 cache, but odds are it's indeed there on the CPU, just not reported by this program. Now, what else is inside or really outside of a computer? In fact, let's start to take a look at things perhaps more familiar. Now, these are just graphical depictions of connectors or sockets on the back of your computer into which you might have very well plugged in various devices. In fact, this collection of ports here are all related to monitors or displays. So a computer, like a desktop computer, tends not to come with a monitor built in. And if it does indeed not, you might need to plug in an external monitor using something like mini DisplayPort, very commonly found on laptops, especially if you want to have not just your primary laptop display, but a secondary, a bigger monitor on your desk. DisplayPort, which is the same idea, but a larger connector that you might typically have on a desktop plugging into a monitor. HDMI, which you might have not only on your laptop or desktop, but possibly even on your TV at home, because this is also the type of cable that you would use to plug a TV into some kind of set-top device in your living room. And then lastly, VGA, still on the list, even though it's super, super old and not nearly as featureful as these other technologies, but you'll very often find at universities like this and companies that have long had projectors installed in the rooms, this older technology, and so it too is still pretty common. Now, what else might we want to plug into a computer? Well, any number of devices as well. In fact, if you've ever seen this symbol, that means you have a port on your computer, desktop or laptop, into which you can plug a whole range of devices. If you've ever needed to plug a printer into your computer, you might use the port labeled with this. A scanner, a digital camera, any number of other peripheral devices might be connected to your computer by way of this device here. Even your mouse and your keyboard, if they're not already wireless, would be plugged in with this device here. And it might actually take any number of shapes, though thankfully some of these are more common than others. This is the universal serial bus, where a bus is a term technologically that refers to some kind of medium along which data can travel, much like a bus travels down a street. So USB has a whole bunch of different connectors, as depicted here, the most common of which is just this rectangular one that rather annoyingly, only 50% of the time do you, if you're like me, plug the cable in the right way, because it can only go in one certain way, so you might have to flip it around. But on the other end of that cable might be another type, not USB-A, but USB-B, which is commonly used to plug into the back of scanners and printers and beyond. More recently, though, have companies like Apple's and others started using USB-C, a third type of connector that thankfully can go either top down or bottom up, thereby not having you think as much when you want to plug in a device. But there's any number of other variants of these connectors, commonly seen on cell phones, in fact, for chargers and data cables, all of which support USB. Now, the USB standard itself has evolved over time. So the latest and greatest version of USB devices and connectors are actually much faster than some of the historically older devices and cables. And so it actually does matter what kind of cable you have and what device you have as to whether or not it will transfer data as fast as you might like. Now, why is this important? Well, one of the devices you can connect to a computer typically via a USB cable is something like an external hard drive. And even if you have a super fast external hard drive that is, say, an SSD underneath the hood, if you're using a slower, older USB cable or technology, you might not nonetheless be able to transfer that data off a very fast device over a slow cable to your computer. And so keeping an eye out for the latest versions of these technologies like USB can actually be quite important. But of course, you might not need cables at all for certain devices. Of course, if you want to use Wi-Fi or wireless internet in your home, in the airport, in Starbucks, or elsewhere, your computer just needs to support Wi-Fi, which odds are it very much does these days. And you might see a symbol somewhere in your computer like this depicting as much. But not everything operates over Wi-Fi. In fact, devices that you might want to plug into or connect to your computer without a cable would tend to use not Wi-Fi, but another wireless technology called Bluetooth that Windows computers and Macs alike support these days. So in fact, if you have a wireless keyboard at home or at work, or a wireless mouse, or if you have any number of other devices that somehow are wirelessly communicating with your computer, perhaps even your headphones these days, odds are those are using a technology called Bluetooth, which have a limited range of just so many feet. They're not nearly as, they don't afford you nearly as much distance as something like Wi-Fi does. But that's a good thing, because generally this technology is used to interconnect your personal devices to your personal computer and not really to others around you. So with all of these various devices inside of and potentially connected outside of my computer, what is it that ensures that they can all intercommunicate? And what is it that ensures that all of this works? Well, at the end of the day, it's the so-called operating system, whether it's Mac OS or Windows, which is simply software that either you or more likely some manufacturer pre-installed on the computer